Hey guys, it's Adam Levitan, and I'm here at the FantasyLabs homepage. And it is June, and that is exciting because we are inching closer to the start of the 2017 NFL season, aka the king of all fantasy sports, aka the time to make the money, aka just the greatest time of year in the fall with the NFL going on. So what we're going to do is start getting ready with some research, with some back testing. We're going to get into depth charts. We're going to get into players on new teams. We're getting into all that. We're going to be on top of all that just so that when the season starts, we're completely ready to go. What I'm going to talk about today is GPPs and trying to locate low owned wide receivers. And I think that for roster construction for GPPs, one of the constructions that you can go with that I think makes a lot of sense is kind of chalky, high volume running backs, a strong quarterback wide receiver stack, and then take some shots at your other. You have three more wide receiver spots available on DraftKings. Take some shots with those on low owned guys. Take some shots at the defense slash special teams position. Those have the most variance. The difference between the ceiling and the floor of a lot of these wide receivers and defense slash special teams is the widest. A guy can take a slant 80 yards to the house a la Odell Beckham. Doesn't have to be Odell Beckham. It could be a lower owned guy, and all of a sudden you have one touch for 16 DraftKings points or whatever. So I'm going to be concentrating on trying to find those low owned wide receivers. One way that I think we can do it is by exploiting our opponent's tendency to put too much emphasis on Vegas lines. And, kind of the first thing people learn when they start playing DFS, and believe me, we are going to have plenty of new people playing on DK come football this year. And one of the first things that they'll learn is, hey, you got to look at the Vegas lines. You got to look at the implied team totals. You got to see who's the favorite, who's the underdog. And you got to build your rosters off that. But what if we go under the assumption that that is exploitable, because while the Vegas lines are mathematically correct, that doesn't mean that that is where the game will end up. So I think that in the long run, yeah, you're making cash game teams. You want to rely on Vegas lines very heavily. I think it's gotten to the point where people make their lineups based on Vegas lines so much that we can kind of go against them and still be profitable. And one of the reasons we can do that is because they often come in at such low ownership. I mean, people are like, oh my God, this team has an implied total of 20 points. We can't use them. We can't use anybody on the team. And we know how unpredictable the NFL is. Come on. I mean, in case you haven't heard, NFL predicting what's going to happen is #hard. So let's get into what I want to talk about here today, which is this kind of low owned wide receiver trends that I've been thinking about. So let's go to NFL tab. We go to trends. We're going to create a trend. We're going to go call it low owned wide receivers. Position is wide receiver, obviously. And we're looking at DraftKings. First thing I typically do when I'm looking at trend is just kind of bump up the salary floor here so that we go to at least 4,000. Just want to get rid of all the people that are just we don't have a projection for or are so far off the radar that nobody uses them. All right, so our baseline here is 8.6% ownership and a plus minus of 1.37. All right, now let's start looking at some of these Vegas filters here. Let's see. So favorites are owned at about 10%. Favorite wide receivers are owned at about 10%. Favorite underdogs are down to 6.9%. So right there, just right out of the gate, we know that we can get so much less ownership just by using underdogs. Fine, let's do that. Next one I'm going to look at is the total in the game. And so as we see here, obviously, when a team gets up, when the total of a game is 50 and above, we get ownership up around 11%. We get a pretty strong plus minus 2.37. These are going to be your most owned. This is going to be your chalk. This is for your cash games. You're going to want guys, wide receivers on the teams who have a high market share, who are playing in a game with a total of 50 or above. But let's say we bring it down here. Let's say that we go 40 at the minimum, and let's say we use 45. All right, well, now we're down at 4.5%. Plus minus has gone down to 1.5, but now we're down to 4.5%. That's interesting to me. 44 down to 4.7. Get a little bump in the plus minus there. Still have a really high count, 369 examples. 43, 4.2, and 2.07. Okay, that's interesting. 4.2, 42. Now look at this. Now we have an own percentage of 4.4, very low, and a plus minus of 3.3. We bumped it up by 2 points off of the overall average across all wide receivers. So let's lock that in there. So now we're talking about a game with a very low total for today's NFL, 40 to 42, and we're talking about an underdog in that game, and they play the wide receiver position. We have a really strong expectation. You can see past results here on the past results tab. If this was during the regular season, current matches for this trend would appear here if you're a subscriber. But anyways, past results you can see here. So we had some interesting going on here. Now let's add one more. Spread percentage. Percentage of spread bets on a team. So basically, the public, how many tickets, not how much money is going in on a team, but how many tickets, how many bets overall are being placed on a team. So basically, the higher this number is, the more people think that team is going to play well. Let's say, well, we think they're not going to play well. Let's go down to like 50. Oh, now nobody's using them. 3.1. See, if this was, 50 to or 60 to 80, now we get ownership percentage up at 11.8. But people are scared to use the team that they don't think is going to play well. So let's put this back down to the minimum, which is 17. And let's try 45. Okay, now we get still 3.03 on the plus minus, 3.3 on the own percentage, really low. Let's go down to 42. 3.27 on the plus minus and 3.3 on the ownership. So let's lock that in. So we have a sample size of 90 here, which isn't great, but I think it's big enough to make some conclusions. We have wide receivers scoring 3.27 more points than their salary-based expectation, and we get them at 3.3% owned. And really, when you're talking about GPPs, we don't want guys squeezing out a little bit. We don't really care about the consistency too much. We don't want them squeezing out a little bit, probably. We want them smashing. So as you can see here, like Terrell Pryor, that looked like week 17 of last year. He was on the road as a dog in a game with a 41.5 total. Excuse me. He had 16 points. Cam Meredith here against the Packers, 22.4 at 4,200. 2.4% ownership. You see all these ownerships are really low. So this is the kind of stuff that we're looking for. Low-owned wide receivers with high ceilings. And one way to find low-owned wide receivers is in these type of parameters. The team's the dog. The total is really low. Nobody thinks the team can cover. And I'll be working on projected ownership again. I was really happy with how the projected ownership turned out. And if you're a subscriber, you can see my projected ownership in models during the season. But this is just a way in trends to kind of find where low-owned wide receivers are. One other thing I wanted to quickly mention is matchups and people, thinking that they know a lot about matchups, and really they're wrong. So like wide receiver ones against Seattle is a trend that I have here. This is just simple. Last season, the opposing team is the Seattle Seahawks. Wide receivers on DraftKings, wide receiver ones on DraftKings. The salary is at least $6,500. Look at this. I mean, nobody uses ownership 5.7%. Nobody uses wide receivers against Seattle. But I mean, Richard Sherman and these guys got smashed a lot last year. Julio hit him for 29 DK points. Mike Evans hit him for 33 DK points. Jordy Nelson, 22. And you get them at ridiculously low ownership. This was the playoff game, so they're not going to have any low ownership on 4-game slates. But look at this regular season ownership on these guys. Some of the best wide receivers in the league get them at 1, 2, 3, 4% because people are afraid to use them against Seattle. So again, these are the kind of trends that you can look at. Now's the time to prepare, back test, see what works, see what doesn't, using the trends tool on Labs. As always, any questions on this, don't hesitate to email me, ajl201@yahoo.com. For the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.